forget something because I feel like I should have had something ready to introduce these all-stars. I call them the all-stars of our counseling group in our district. I consider them all my mentors. I've had the pleasure of working with them in one way or another. Miss Academia was actually one of my instructors in my master's program. Mrs. Palmer was one of my internship supervisors as I was an aspiring school counselor. And Mr. Smith, I had the pleasure of working with, and I just learned so much from him. He is someone I really look up to. So I'll leave it up to them to tell you a little bit more about who they are, but it is definitely a pleasure to have these three together tonight presenting to all of you because they really are leaders in our counseling unit in the Sweetwater Union High School District. So it's definitely a treat to have all three of them with us tonight. So welcome to them. They're awesome. Thank you for being here tonight, you guys.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Wow, I really feel my age now. Thank you for that. Hi, everyone. I'm Dina Donato Palmore, and I had the honor of working with Elizabeth for like, I don't know, maybe close to 16 years at Sweetwater High School before I transitioned to the district office as a district counselor for our students who are our youth in transition. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am a proud Pinay, second generation, not from San Diego, from the LA County area, and I'm just honored to have been asked to be part of this presentation, this workshop for you all. Go ahead, Kev. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Kevin Smith. I'm a counselor, and my hat goes way off Elizabeth. Elizabeth should be getting 3 times her salary because she does the work of 3 counselors. And so, and I think Dina, you can agree with that. And yes. Jen and Dina are like sisters to me. I really mean that. I don't even call them colleagues. We call each other brothers and sisters because I feel like that. I've known Jen for 27 years. And so, Jen, I don't know if, I mean, not Jen, but Dina, we go back 27 years now. And so it's been a long time. And so I am seriously humbled to be here. It is so important to show solidarity with the Asian community, especially in light of what's going on. And I know that it's uncomfortable because some of these offenses have been committed by African-American people, which deeply hurts me. So it's really important for me to let you guys know that I stand with you. And a large part of the African-American also says the same thing.
Thanks, Kev. Jen?
Hi, I'm Jen Academia. I'm a counselor at Eastlake Middle School. I'm a mother of 3, a grandmother of 1, newly published children's book author for called Nero the Mexipino Superhero. And I'm just honored to be invited to represent, to speak on behalf of our community. And just I am a proud Pinay, growing and learning, never too late. I always say, as long as you still have breath in your lungs, it's never too late to learn something new.
Exactly.
Right. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Awesome.
So before we start our conversation, let's just pick up some agreements during our time together, just so that we are very authentic in our interaction with each other. And so I hope that we took the luxury of putting these agreements together, and our hope is that it's something that we all in this room can agree with. So we all agreed that we're going to remain engaged, that we're going to be willing to embrace discomfort because this is not an easy conversation to have, that we're going to listen to understand, and that we're going to accept non-closure and disclosure, because there's no ending to this, and the disclosure again is uncomfortable, and it may push some buttons that we may not know is there for us. But we're hoping that this will lead us to a rich engagement of talking about what race is and how race impacts our relationship with each other.
Mhm.
So if I can ask Kevin.
Dina, oh, sorry. There's something in the chat. If there's some feedback, if you're not presenting, if you could press mute because there's a echo.
Oh, gotcha.
Oh, is it me?
Gotcha.
I don't know who it's from. It's just everyone should stay mute until they're speaking.
Oh, how do I mute myself?
At the bottom, next to the red phone, to the left.
Then I have to stop presenting.
Oh,
Yeah. Let me see if it's me. I'll mute myself first.
okay.
There you go.
There you go. Okay.
All right, Val, I think you're gonna have to take over the I don't know how to do this.
Do you want me?
I got you.
Okay.
So, Dina, I don't have access to the slides, so
I'll do it. Give me a second.
Hey, Valerie, is it possible just to kind of see who's here? Is it possible just to do that a little bit?
Yeah, how about you do that while I get some tech ready?
Okay, can we all go around and just kind of, we already introduced ourselves. Can you guys introduce yourselves so I'll just kind of know who's here?
Hi, Claire, teacher at San Isidro High School. I teach science.
Ah, okay. Great.
Hi, I'm Sadie Villaseñor, and I work with Dina with in transition.
Oh, okay. I think I've met you before.
Yes.
Yes.
Dina, I wonder if the noise is the fan. Maybe. No.
The noise is there's 5 microphones on, and so if you're not actively speaking, I respectfully ask that you mute yourself at the very bottom. There's like a little circle that has the microphone, and you just tap it. And if you just need to jump in with really quick, you can press the space bar or unmute yourself while you say that statement.
Thanks, Claire.
Okay. Can they see it?
Somebody know how to do that.
Can you see this? Okay, there. You could see it now, right?
Yes, we can see the presentation.
Okay, there you go. Tell me where to go. Just tell me where to go.
Okay. We are on slide 4. Thanks, Val.
Okay, you're welcome. There.
All right, Kev.
All right, so here we go. You know, I really wanted to change the tone of it. Instead of saying question, I thought it'd be good to just say that this is going to be a discussion. You know, and so the first discussion of tonight would be, how old were you when you realized you were your ethnicity or your race? And so, you know, that's not really a question that you commonly get from people, but it's an interesting question, and I think it can kind of reveal some really interesting things. So let's just go around. You can either put it in the chat or think about it for a little bit, and you can either put it in the chat or you can raise your hand. But it's a great question, though. I think it's a really good question.
Do you want to write that? No. Well, what do you want to write?
Sorry.
Okay, that's my bad. I'm sorry. Trying to get my daughter engaged.
Okay. So we're definitely going to need some volunteers for this one.
So Erica said that she was 11.
11 years old. Wow. Okay. Now, who was that again, Dina? Who said that?
It's Erica.
Okay, Erica. Okay. Adults, jump in there. It doesn't have to just be the students. So adults, get in there.
You know, one thing that was interesting, I had the liberty of looking at your presentation beforehand, and I pondered on this question.
Yeah.
I think for me, I've always known I was Filipino,
Hmm.
but it wasn't, and it was never an issue. I never, I kind of went back. I never really experienced anything bad. And then I remember when I went to college, because I never had Filipino friends growing up because of where I grew up, I went to go join the Filipino group. But that's when I first heard the phrase whitewashed. And
Ooh.
people were saying, like, and that was the first time I
Rough.
started to feel I wasn't Filipino enough.
Right. Got you. It's powerful. Do you mind, Val, if I ask you, where did you grow up?
My dad was in the military,
Okay.
so we moved around a lot, but most of my life I was overseas. And so we were on military bases that were diverse, but like I grew up with a hodgepodge of people versus, a big group of Filipinos or whatever.
Got you. Got you. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing that. It's really good. How about some other folks?
For me, it was college also, Val. I knew I'm Filipino, but I grew up in Pomona where it was predominantly Latino and African American and even Samoan. In fact, I remember a good friend of mine asked me if I was Samoan, and I was like, no, I'm Filipino. It was just, it didn't actually do any, I mean, I didn't wonder why they were asking that. But it was in college that I really discovered what being Filipino meant, and it wasn't until I took my Filipino American history class that I really understood what being Filipino in America meant. And just so that if you guys don't know, my first name is Dina, but I grew up being Dinah because my parents thought that it sounded more American to be Dina. And so all of my high school friends know me as Dinah. And I still cringe when I hear that. But that was definitely a turning point for me in college when I retained my name because it was so symbolic of being Pinay, being Filipino.
Thanks, Dina, for sharing that. Anyone else want to share?
I'll share mine. I as well, I've always known I was Filipino, but the earliest memory I can remember is in second grade, they would always put the new kids from the Philippines, they would always pair them up with me because I knew how to speak Filipino, even though I was born, I'm kind of an anomaly. I can speak Filipino but I was born here. So a lot of Filipino kids who are born in the United States don't necessarily speak Filipino. So I'm just a kid with one hand that can speak it. So they would always pair the new Filipino kid that came straight from the Philippines with me. And I was like, why would they always do that? But then I figured, oh, they're Filipino, I'm Filipino. So they want the kid to feel welcome. So they put them with me. So that's my earliest memory of being Filipino.
Claire wrote something in the chat.
Okay.
She wrote that. Oh, sorry, Claire.
No, seventh grade, went to do a group project at the house. Dinner. What? I was so confused. Actually, I didn't realize how much, like, then that opened up a conversation of like, eat different meals, you have different traditions, we have different, oh, interesting. It was kind of like, oh, I didn't know not everybody had just one parent, or like, I was like, oh, I just figured it's just, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. Not having rice with dinner, that was like life-changing for me.
And we're all just talking with each other. I think I realized that I was in the third grade and we were part of the first public school integration in Massachusetts. And I remember being on the bus and I was terrified because I was a mama's boy and I had to leave her And I remember they threw rocks at our bus. We were going to Wellesley, Massachusetts. And so Wellesley's a very affluent town in the state of Massachusetts. And I lived in Roxbury, which is like the hood. And we were on this bus, and they pelted our buses with rocks, and they were calling us names. And I didn't even know what the N-word was at that time. And so I kind of knew that we were a little different since I was in 3rd grade. Yeah. Let's get a couple others.
Yeah, Kevin, my experience was between high school and college.
Yeah.
When I noticed that my oldest sister,
Mhm.
yeah, she was always asked to be a godparent of one of our relatives or extended family, you know, to be the godparent of their child. And then I started asking myself, or even asked my sister, I go, wow, you've always been asked. I wonder why, I wonder what it is about me where I'm never asked to be a godmother to one of our nieces or nephews and so on. And my sister had shared with me, because she speaks Tagalog and I don't. And she had shared, well, you're not that traditional. They like more traditional. So in other words, when I was hearing Valerie share, it was like not Filipino enough. I wasn't that traditional Filipino girl because I played sports. I played basketball. I loved weightlifting. I did a lot of the so-called untraditional activities that especially my mom didn't support because she didn't feel I should be participating in athletic sports in that capacity. So that showed me that I was different, very different. And,
Very different.
And with it came rejection.
Mm.
The
And
rejection.
Jen, you grew up here in California.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Born and raised.
Born and raised.
Born
and raised.
Mm-hmm.
So we can go to the next slide if anyone else has anything. If anyone wants to share, they're more than welcome. But there's another slide that I thought was really interesting is that, you know, I was reading some research on this, and Dr. Sullivan and Dr. Wilton, they did an article, a really interesting article I read. And it says that by age 4, children in the U.S. associate whites with wealth and higher status. And race-based discrimination is widespread once children start elementary school. And so I just thought that was incredibly powerful because I remember as a kid, you know, white kids not really wanting to play with us because they thought we were dirty. And so they thought our brown skin was a dirty skin. And so I just wondered if any of you have experienced that.
You experience that? No, but in looking at my son's development,
Yes. Yes.
my son is biracial. He's Filipino and African American, and I don't think he knew what that meant until he hit school. And I remember kindergarten. He came home one day and he asked me and my husband, "Why do they call white people white when they're peach, Mom?"
Right.
Or why do they call black people black when they're brown? You know, like they're coffee color. And it was a conversation that we had to have about the color, the name, or the name given to races were not based on the color in their Crayola box, but there was a different connotation to what those labels meant. You know, and at that time it wasn't, you know, he was too young to really understand that there's a social structure that
Exactly.
was embedded in those racial labels. And so but he never thought Filipino was a race, you know. That wasn't, it was just blatant, it was actually just the extreme in black and white that he had asked about.
That's powerful, Dan. And he's a good-looking kid, I can tell you that. He's a very good-looking kid, and very good. Listen, I want to get some more input on what do you guys get from this quote, because this one I really sat with for a long time, and it really it was an emotional thing because it really evoked a lot of memories. And so what about the rest of you? What do you get when you read this quote? Or not quote, but this statement written by Dr. Sullivan and Dr. Wilton, the research.
Well, growing up, all of my teachers were all pretty much white old ladies, like older white ladies. Our administrators were white.
Right.
The teachers were white, and so even on TV, the newscasters were white.
Right.
And so you well, at least for us, like we grew up thinking that is who professionals are. Those are the leaders in our community are white people, because you didn't see people that looked like us in those roles growing up, right? So it's funny because my kids make fun of me because every time I see somebody Filipino on TV, you know, on popular culture, like I freak out. I'm like, oh my God, look, they're Filipino. I'm like, oh, that's so cool, they're Filipino.
Right.
And my kids say, Mom, why do you freak out every time you see somebody Filipino on TV? I said, because you take it for granted that you see people that look like you on TV, you know, winning Oscars, on the news, you know, and on TV shows, you see people that look like you. But when I grew up, it wasn't like that.
Right.
And so it's funny to see, like by age 4, kids already have, you know, that's already on their minds. It's already something that they're thinking about. And if I think back, like, yeah, you know, once you start school, that's kind of what you know of. That's what you learn.
Yeah, Elizabeth, that is so powerful. I hear you about being excited when you see your folks on TV and they're not getting arrested, you know. And so, you know, I just think about the transmission of information, how we get that in the forms that come in. You know, you look at age 4, I mean, I think I was probably playing in sand at age 4, but yet you're still getting these powerful messages. And so I think about the transmission of information that kids get. And that stuff is coming from all different types of mediums. And so I look at that, but I would also extend this to not just, you know, wealth, but also beauty standards. And I was thinking about that. You know, what messages are being sent to kids about beauty standards and about intelligence. And there's research out on that as far as like even kids of color who prefer, you know, European features and European things over their own. And so I just think this is a really, really telling the data right here, what they disclose about race and how young kids get it. You know I had to constantly remind my kids that their dark skin wasn't a bad thing. You know, I had to constantly tell them that because I knew that when they go out in society that they'll be looked down upon because they happen to be a darker hue. Although there's, you know, none of us are the same complexion, but I just knew that they were going to be up against some challenges. And so it just really shows you the racialization and just how racialized the United States really is. So there's another slide we want to go to.
Kevin,
Yes.
I'm sorry. We have 2 hands raised. So
Oh,
before we,
I'm sorry. You know what? I didn't.
so I'm going to have Ron go first, and then after Ron, it's you, Jen.
No.
Hey, Kevin.
Hey, no, how are you, sir?
How are you?
Good.
I was telling the Uber Eats committee, I think, and then I told Dina that your presentation is going to be the best. It's going to be hard to beat because of your cross-section of expertise. You as San Diego County drug rehab guy after the Colors movie. I wanted to do my, whatever it's called, education doctorate at the time, but you beat me to it. And then you have Jen there. I don't even know what the exact title is, marriage, family, child counseling experience. Then you have Dina. Wow, wealth of experience. Now foster homeless youth in transition. Gonna be hard to beat. Just saying. Hi, everybody. So mine's just brief and just digest it. I did a dissertation and I don't even know what I was doing, but I just came up with it on my own. I wrote, children learn what they live. This was a long time ago, way before all of you were born. Still exists. By age 4, I'm thinking, okay, I didn't go to preschool, but that's, you know, kids go to preschool, what, age 2, 3, 4, whatever, right? Children learn what they live. They see it, they hear it, they have eyes in their home. And now it's like extended household COVID stuff, but I don't know, digest it. Hi, everybody. Go on.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. No, appreciate it, man. Definitely.
It's Jen. Go ahead, Jen.
So, Kevin, as I read that quote, my first feeling is sadness.
It
It
is.
really saddens me to see that statistic. And then on a personal level, I remember I would always love to play outside, even at 5, 6 years old, you know, running in the sprinklers, but then being scolded by my mom because I was staying out under the sun too long and I was getting too dark.
Right.
And
right.
that, you know, and I didn't understand, I didn't understand that till later, because there was even a method when we would take a shower or a bath, we would use a stone to rub against our skin. And it was to the point where when my mom would do that to my legs because they were getting so dark, because I'd always wear shorts or slippers, you know, playing outside, where it would actually scrape some of my skin off of my legs and my arms, and crying, just crying about it. And she wouldn't say a word. And then she would have me put something on my face to whiten my skin. And as I'm older, I see how much of those products are available. They have an aisle in Seafood City.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the one. That's Claire, yes, that's it. She put it on the chat. Yes, that's it. To put it on my face to whiten my skin, especially behind my neck or my legs and my knees. So this statistic is, again, it saddens me, but it's real.
Very real.
It's so real. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is sad, Jen. I think it's incredibly sad. But you know, I love what you just did, Jen. Is that you really set the tone that I hope we can maintain, and that is you being really transparent. You know, you really share something that was seriously sensitive. And I really think in order for us to move forward, we need to have this kind of courageous conversation. I know there's probably some things that will come up that are not really positive about people's views about African Americans, but they need to come out. You know, for us to really move forward, we need to really bring that stuff out. Personally, I don't get offended by that at all. I think it's healthy. I think it's really good. And so there is a message that lighter is better and lighter is more beautiful. And so, but we need to realize where those messages come from. And so I appreciate you sharing that, Jen. Appreciate it.
And Ron?
Okay, so real brief, I don't want to monopolize this, but reality, I grew up 5 kids, right? 2 older sisters. I'm the oldest boy, middle child, 2 younger brothers, 5 kids. And you know, that came up early on in our family. We're close, right? We talk about stuff growing up. And we're looking at each other. We have the same parents that we know of, right? We don't choose our parents. But we were questioning, why is there 2 of us that are dark and then 3 of us light skinned? And then another thing, growing up, you know, you have best friends at Montgomery, multicultural friends, right? We didn't look at color, right? So then we started hearing, oh, in Mexico, right? All the dark people, right? Oh, but if you're from Ensenada, you're light skinned, you're educated. You know, we hear stuff like that. We're like, what? We don't pay attention to that stuff. It goes in one ear and out the other.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. This is great. I love this stuff. This is really good stuff. So don't hesitate, Valerie, if you can help me. If you notice a hand being up, can you let me know?
Yeah, I just don't. I don't want to interrupt you.
No, not at all. This is the kind of stuff that I was actually hoping that we would get this kind of discussion. So I appreciate all of you that are sharing.
And Jen, do you have your hand raised still, or is that leftover? I'm Kevin's monitor, so I gotta make sure. Go ahead, Kevin.
Leftovers. Let's go to the next slide, Valerie. Thanks so much for that.
So we're just gonna do a little bit of a interactive thing and have you guys put in the chat put the number in the chat if one, you've heard jokes told about members of your racial or ethnic group, whether it's with each other or from outside,
right,
being told about those or being told those jokes. 2, if you have been stopped or harassed by the cops because of the way you look. 3, if people have made assumptions about how smart or lazy you are based on your race or ethnicity. 4, if you have had someone walk up to you assuming that you don't speak English or have been told that you speak good English. 5, you didn't know about your racial or cultural history in your middle school or high school. And 6, if you've been asked, where are you from? And you tell them from San Diego, no, really, where are you from? Like someone wanting to know your ethnic background. So if we can have you guys respond on here, onto the chat. 1, 3, 5, 6. Anyone else?
What virtual platform are you on? Where's the little
Oh,
chat button?
we're doing
Where is
chat.
it?
Ron, it's in the upper right-hand corner. It's a text box.
Okay, let me see if I have it.
1 and 4.
I'm on an iPad, so it looks kind of different, I think. My laptop's over here to my right somewhere.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask you a question to that. And you can leave that screen on, Val, if you don't mind. And this isn't a chat response. This is more of a conversation. So, what was your reaction to those statements? What's your reaction to those statements that were just made, and were any of it true? So I'm gonna pick on Zadie. Zadie, you put 1 and 4 on the chat. What was your reaction when I read that? And were any of it true for you?
You said, what was my reaction when you read it?
To the 1 and 4 when I read it, and were any of it true?
Yes, I thought, like, yeah, for sure. Number 1 happens a lot, all the time. Number 4, it happens a lot when, like, businesses. They assume.
Go ahead.
They assume I only speak Spanish or I don't know English.
Thank you, Zadie.
I think it's the color of my skin.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks, Zadie. Now, you and Brianna, you guys experienced number 5. What was that for you?
Well, for me, I have a different experience than Brianna does. For me, I didn't I just kind of learned about the oral history from my grandma lived with us when I was younger, but never in school, right? Like formally. And then I didn't learn it until I took a college course in my master's program. I chose to take a Filipino history class, and that was the first time I ever had a Filipino educator.
Wow.
I spoke a little bit about this at our last Makaisa conference. Brianna went to East Lake Middle, East Lake High. Her counselor was Filipino, right? She took Filipino class, the language class, and she had Filipino teachers all around her. So her experience, very similar to Elizabeth, when she was talking about the difference between her and her kids. You know, she's been able to grow up in a world where her culture was celebrated or her culture was seen. I probably should let her talk. She's in college now. Hi, Brianna.
Brianna, I'm going to ask a different question for you. Okay. My question is, how did it make you feel when you experienced those statements? When you heard those statements, what were those feelings for you when you heard it?
Which statements? Usually when I hear jokes about my race, I'm not the type of person to have any conflict. So usually I just laugh it off, but really in the inside, like, it's kind of embarrassing to see people do that to someone. Like, I don't really get the joke. I mean, it's pointless, honestly. Usually when people think of Filipinos at Eastlake, because we are predominantly a white school, everyone's like, "Oh, you're smart." I am not the smartest person in the world, and so it usually kind of I'm always like, that's an assumption made, and it's kind of sucks because I'm always like, "No, I do not have the answers. I don't know what you're talking about."
You wouldn't give answers away anyway.
No, I would never. I probably don't even have the answers myself. Usually, I remember a time when I was in elementary school. A kid went up to me and was like asking me, like speaking me in Tagalog, and I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, like I don't speak." And then he's like, "Oh, you speak really good English." Like I thought you like he assumed like I was from the Philippines, and I was like, "No, I'm from Chula Vista." Like I didn't, I didn't really get, I really didn't understand that growing up. So yeah, that's my experience with the statements. I'll give it
Thank
a
you, Brianna. Thank you. Thank you for being courageous and sharing
Yes.
your experience, son. Let's have one more person.
Ron has his hand raised.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Ron.
Okay, so I'm in a lot of meetings, so I don't even know what I share, but I know this one is new. I remember my best friend Andy in 7th grade. He went to the Philippines, and you know, you back then you go for a month, right? So the guy was gone for a month. Like, anyways, he comes back right with all these Filipino shirts, right? And he gave me one. And back then, you know, when you're in 7th grade, us boys, you know, playing sports all the time, and Montgomery Junior basketball, flag football for 2 years, we would just make fun of each other, just jokingly, right? We used to call it base on each other, right? And just amongst boys, right? We're talking about 4 or 5 boys walking home, and you know, 2 from school, playing sports, whatever. And then we would make fun of each other about, you know, those shirts because fresh off the boat, right? A fob, fresh off the boat. So then we didn't wear the shirts, or at least I didn't. I didn't wear the shirt because I felt like I was going to get ridiculed, you know, and I felt it was sad. I felt like embarrassed. I didn't feel like, you know, representing that shirt. Nowadays, I would represent that shirt in a heartbeat or any of my buddies' programs, right? So that in a way just shows that when people like nowadays they call it bullying, but we're just joking. It's just amongst our friends, right? We're not doing it to other people. So I didn't feel like, you know, comfortable, or I didn't feel, what's the word I'm looking for? I felt kind of embarrassed to wear the shirt. And then all of a sudden later, then there's this Asian show called Fresh Off the Boat. I'm like, what is this? I start watching it, right? It's a different ethnic group. It's interesting. But the other thing I think I mentioned to this last week or in Dina's thread, I got racial profiled twice. And so I changed my appearance. I was driving my car with my 2 kids, minding my own business in East Lake, a mile from my home, bringing my daughter and my son to a soccer program. And some officer, a young officer, pulls me over and starts questioning me about stuff that's nonsense. I'm like, what is this guy pulling me over for? Now I didn't account for this time. I'm late bringing my child, you know, to their event, and then my kids have to sit in the back and listen to this stuff. And I figured out after the second time, I was with my ex-wife Sunday afternoon, coming back from dinner somewhere in IB, some old man pulled me over and asked me about my fog lights. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's part of the car. They're Denon lights or whatever. So he questioned it briefly, and then he let me go. So I'm like, it's probably because my third time I got stopped in Houston, secondary. I look like an Arabic guy. Seriously, I changed my appearance. Goatee. I look like an Arabic guy. Seriously, because I just had short hair, dark, you know, tanned. I'm tanned. You know, I look like an Arabic guy. Not to, you know, say anything politically incorrect. I had to really down deep look at my appearance. And people were thinking I'm like some sort of like from, I don't know, Iraq or somewhere, Middle East or like Dominican or something, because of the way I looked. So I'm like, wow, this is like broad daylight. 3 different times, 3 different scenarios. Within 3 months, I had to really dig deep and figure out what's going on in my appearance. I changed it.
Thanks, Fernello. For me, the statement that's here that really was bone bearing for me was the number 6 one, in terms of asking where am I from. I've always felt when I'm asked that, that I am a visitor of this country and not someone who belongs. And it's painful to be asked that, because what I'm really being told is that you don't look like you belong here, and therefore you've got to be from somewhere else. And so that's definitely something that I think, it has had an impact in how I've grown up, and in how I look at race, and how I look at, for a long time, and how I've looked at myself. So it was very impactful. It was a very hurtful interaction with people when I'm asked that. I think I think Kevin is going to go. Val, if you can move to not the next slide, but the slide after that. I think Kevin is going to talk a little bit more about what this really means with that waterfall activity that we just did, and naming it.
And that's Valerie. I'm so sorry. What was your daughter's name again?
Brianna.
Brianna.
Brianna. Yeah, Brianna, what you experience and what everyone else has experienced is really, that's something we go through all the time. I know I go through that. It's all different for different people, but I know I go through these things, what they call microaggressions. And it's something that people of color, we go through. I know I go through it every single day. I am someone who really loves their skin. I love my skin. I wouldn't change my skin for the world. I think it's a blessing to have my skin. And it doesn't mean I feel superior to other people. I just love my skin because it's done me well. I'm older, but I don't look it. And it doesn't wrinkle, and I put a little lotion on, it shines nice, I feel good. But I also know it reminds people of security, because wherever I go, people think about locking their cars and locking their doors, and oh, did I forget to lock this? And so I know there's more than just beautiful skin there. It means something. And so really, if someone could go ahead and read this definition, I really appreciate it.
It says commonplace daily
indignities. Mm-hmm.
I promise I teach in our district. Indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate negative racial insults towards people of color.
Right. And guys and girls, this stuff is something we go through every single day. And I definitely want to hear from you. And I like to think of them as kind of like paper cuts, because if you notice in the definition, sometimes, they're unintentional. And sometimes they're coming from people outside of your race that you consider friends. I've had people who I considered friends say things, and it's like a paper cut where you think about it and you go, wait a minute, that was racist. It's not always coming from someone who is really a malicious person. Sometimes it's coming from someone who really has good intentions and they're good-hearted people, but they're just not aware of these biases that they hold. And so I also think of a beautiful woman who's a great person, has great character. She's just an interesting person, but no one sees beyond the beauty, and that all they can see is her beauty. And she's waiting for someone to say, what about me? What about me? Do you see me? And they can't, because they just focus on the beauty. And it's kind of like these microaggressions where they focus only on the skin and these preconceived notions of what comes with that skin color. And so microaggressions is a huge part of life. And I wanted to know and ask, do you feel like, as far as like the frequency, I get it every single day. And you guys have been so kind to let me join this group with you guys as Asian Americans. How often do you guys get it? Or do you feel like you get it at all?
I had kind of recently learned this word, not like within the last couple of years, this definition of microaggressions. Mm-hmm. And I think back, I feel I've received I could remember growing up, I know Jennifer talked a little bit about the color of our skin in our culture, but I think another big thing in the Filipino culture is the shape of your nose. Mm-hmm. And I have a very straight and narrow nose, and I've been told that my entire life. And when I was growing up, even from when I was very little, people would ask my parents, who is this little girl? And my mom and dad would be like, this is my daughter. Like, they were like, this is my daughter. And then they'd be like, oh, she doesn't look Filipino. Like, I've gotten, you don't
Wow.
look Filipino, everything from the gas station to the store. It doesn't help that I'm married to a Cuban and that my last name is now Ruiz. But like when I think back of growing up, like, imagine that was my life almost when we went to church, when we went to parties, someone would always say that to me.
Right.
And it does have, you know, what you said, Kevin, I think is true, these paper cuts, right? And it's just, and I think those paper cuts for me has had an impact of how I feel as a Filipino. Because ever since I was little, people would ask my parents, who is this little girl? And like, obviously, right, like, I'm holding my mom's hand. We're in, you know, my whole family's with us.
Right.
But like, those paper cuts over the last 44 years
That's right.
add up.
Right.
And, you know, I was joking to Dina. Dina and I talked a couple weeks ago when we were preparing for all of this. And it's like I've had this resurgence of being Filipino and and understanding what it means to be Filipino. And even though an understanding for any race that our upbringing doesn't even really define, like, just because I didn't grow up around Filipinos and I didn't speak Tagalog or doesn't make me any less Filipino because I have a straight nose or I'm not dark. Like, that doesn't make me any less of a Filipino. And so, I really like what you said that, these paper cuts, pretty soon they make a big wound that is very hard to heal.
And that's the real challenge, is that you really have, Dina, there's another slide, and I'm just going to go over this real fast, is that we have a real challenge as far as, or the decision to make is, no, the one more back. Yeah, right here. And my story is no more important than any of the stories that were shared in this time that we were just sharing with each other. It's just that I just want to kind of give you a personal story and we can kind of talk about it a little bit. I know my wife and I, we bought our house about 22 years ago in Chula Vista. This is when houses were really affordable in Chula Vista. And it's not like a Yo MTV crib house or nothing like that. This is a house, but it's, we decorated it, and over the years, we'll have people come over to fix stuff. And I've noticed that at least 4 times during the time I've been here, the guys who come in, usually my age or older, they always ask me this question. And they ask me, are you the owner? Number one. And number two, they always ask me, what do I do? And I don't know if you guys get that, but I'm just thinking, if I were a white person, would he ask me that question? And I'm kind of a sarcastic person. I have a little attitude, So in my mind, I'm saying to myself, what I really want to say to him is that, listen, I'm going to tell you this, but you can't tell anyone. I got this little drug business going on, and I used to be in the NBA, and I got cut by the Lakers because I know that's what he's thinking. And it's a microaggression, that it's a paper cut that honestly, and I'm not, forgive my language, but I kind of get pissed off a little bit, because I get tired of it. And so, because it's not, it's like, no, I work just like you work. And so those are the kind of things that we go through. And so the next slide is really what we're leading to, Valerie, is you can go to the next one, is this thing called racism. In this country, I don't know about you, but I can tell you, people say the last 4 years have been really, really difficult, or the last year, and I cannot agree with that. But honestly, I honestly can't think of a time when it wasn't difficult. I really can't. It's been a challenge from birth. And so for me, I can say that. That's my experience. I don't know what your experience is. And so, but the word racism is a word that has been brought up a lot. you hear words, and our vocabulary has expanded over the time, especially the last year. You know, you're hearing words like anti-racist and white fragility and implicit bias. And so I just want to kind of feel you guys out as far as your definition of this word racism and just kind of see what you think it is. So don't feel shy, just throw it out there.
Ron has his hand raised.
Okay.
Yep. You know, I'm reinforcing that that's the reason why this is going to be hard to beat. Just saying. And then we're only, okay, anyways. Yeah, that's real. I get that all the time. I did like 14 house projects. And, you know, some of them are my buddies. But the ones that come in, they ask me the same questions. I'm like, what's going on here? So then I ask myself, do I ask those questions? I probably do as well. But, you know, I just let it go in one ear and out the other because it's a waste of my time. But I hear you. It's real. So then you know, the other day I had to like fill in 1 hour for a crisis for a mom to, you know, show up to pick up her kid who was, you know, self-harm. Anyways, you know, to go bring the kid to some mental health hospital, right? Long story short, I'm filling in an hour. I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, with all the protocols. So I start, you know, I customize stuff. I have my own best practices. I start asking the kid to whatever on his phone. I didn't do this stuff. His journal, you know. So he's like looking up words. So I looked up the word indignity, and it says like shame and stuff, and that's hiya, H-I-Y-A. We covered that last week. My sister used to always, one of my older sisters used to always say, you know, keep your dignity. I'm like, what does that mean? But that's what it's alluding to. And then the other word, microaggressions. I know what micro means. I know what aggressions mean, but I'm learning these two words. I mean, I don't use these vocabularies. I looked it up, and I'm looking at all the different things on it. I just screenshot like 6 on my phone. There's videos of it and all that. This is real stuff. I'm learning so much. So somebody else continue on, please. Thank you.
Hey, Ronello, thanks for sharing. You know,
Kevin.
No, you guys, I really want to hear less of myself and more of you guys. And so if someone else can share about what they feel racism is, I'd love to hear it.
Kevin, Elizabeth wrote in the chat, racism when one experiences benefits or disadvantages based on their color of their skin.
Awesome. Awesome, Elizabeth. Yes, absolutely. 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 How about some more?
Hey, how about reverse racism? We always just like joke around with our own people, like Filipinos. I'm tired of it. You know, it's like growing up, envy, right? You know, it's like people don't like hearing about others, you know, moving up and, you know, the prosperity, keep up with the Joneses. I'm glad your last name's Smith, not Jones, Kevin. You know, keeping up with the Joneses, envy. You know, you get a new job, your kid gets a new job, you get a new house. Keeping up with the Joneses. This is like capitalism, materialistic stuff. Now, you know, we try our best to outgrow it, minimalist, cost effective, especially during these COVID times of unemployment. But what about that? You know, like we all have our prejudices and stereotypes and our own little racism. But we're talking about blatant stuff, right? Down deep stuff that really hurts, like you're explaining, I think, right?
And I'm actually glad, Ronello, you brought that up as far as the prejudices, because we're gonna get into that. But I guess for the sake of time, because Ms. Donato Palmore and Ms. Academia, they have some really good stuff they want to share. Valerie, do you mind going to the next slide really fast? And so, Ronello, you brought up prejudice, and that's something that I really want to make sure that we understand is that people often conflate prejudice with racism. And there is a difference, and don't get me wrong, they're related, but there's some differences. And so, one more slide over. Thank you, Valerie. And so, prejudice refers to the beliefs, thoughts, feelings, and attitudes someone holds about a group. So, prejudice is not based on experience. Instead, it is a prejudgment originating outside of actual experience. And so, that is it's really important that we don't conflate the two. But one more slide, Valerie. So now I'm going to get to racism. And this is really, you know, we think about blatant racism, which is, for me, you know, you're looking at Derek Chauvin, what he did to George Floyd, was just such a heinous act. that I think most people would agree that that was just a real strong display of racism. But looking at the definition here, it's a system of advantage based on race, which each race is assigned a value. And just stopping you guys really fast. And so a system of advantage based on race where each race is assigned a value. First of all, my first question is, by whom? And then the next part of that is, it is backed up by people and institutions with power. And so when you start looking at prejudice, I know we went over the age of kids when they first decide, like when they can first differentiate between races, and they start attaching meanings to race at such a young age, like 5 years old. Well, those messages are coming to those kids from different sources. And so they could grow up to be really, really prejudiced. But now racism is something different here. Now, racism is backed up by people and institutions with power. And let me give you some examples of this. Can you, one more slide, Valerie? I don't know if you guys can see this, but I think I need to throw my glasses on so I can see it. And this is a difference. You can be a prejudiced person, but when you have racism, and there's a long-standing debate about, can African Americans be racist? And my answer to that in the United States, no. And so I say no to that. And I would say an resounding no. And so you look right here, you look at the power of the media and how powerful the media is. And so when you look at how people get their information, people are getting their information through different mediums, and internet, print, the TV. And so these are some different ways of racism, forms of racism, examples of racism in history. You know, you look at the yellow peril during the 1600s right here, and that's a picture of a Chinese American man. And as a cartoon, he has a gun in one hand and he has a torch in another. And there you go with the stereo, you know, you got that very familiar white woman at his foot. And at his feet, I'm sorry, but then you have right next door to that, I don't know if you guys can see that picture, but that's a picture of Serena Williams, and that was actually in a newspaper. The cartoonist actually printed that, and it's just such a, what you have to know when you read that kind of picture is that these messages and that imagery is imagery that they historically against people of color, and it really didn't matter if you were African American or Jewish or Filipino. I've actually seen the same, you know, they exaggerate features. They give them a beastly look as if they were an animal. Now, Serena Williams is definitely a passionate player. We all know that. I don't know if any of you watch tennis. She's a passionate player, and with a very solid, strong physique. But that's going way beyond that. And I also remember growing up where, you know, I was born in the 60s, and so I remember growing up, I remember a player named Andre Agassi. I don't know if you guys remember Andre Agassi? Mm-hmm. Who is Andre Agassi? Mm-hmm. Yeah, what about John McEnroe? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I've never seen a picture.
Yes.
Those are two passionate players. But the imagery put on Serena is very, very racist to me. But there you go. And so when you look at the power, you look at who owns those media outlets. And just think about the person who read that magazine, that newspaper, leaving that for his little kid to see. So what is that little 5-year-old seeing when they look at that image? Well, they're seeing a dark person who looks very angry and mean. And so when we start looking and thinking about why kids, or how kids are able to differentiate between races, well, it starts like this right here with these images. The next one is you look at laws. You know, and I forgot to put the word anti, but it's anti-segregation laws. And those are laws that have been in this country since the 1600s all the way to 1967. And so, and these are laws that prohibited people who were not white to marry white people, to marry white women. And you know, there I go again, I need to slap my hand, but I just always laughed at that because I said, no one's really addressing the issue that there are actually white women that want to marry people of color. And so there's a picture right here. Dina gave me a really, really good book about Philip Vera, who was a farm worker. And Dina, thank you so much for that book. It was just a great book. I read it. I think I may have even read it, like almost read through it twice. And it's about Filipino farm workers and how there were no Filipino women And so the Filipino men developed relationships with the white women, but there are laws saying that they could not marry and they could not get together. And those are the anti-miscegenation laws. And so there you go again with people who think that Filipinos may be hardworking, but they're not the same as us. And so you look at that description of racism, it's not just placing a value. They're basically saying that you're another form of human. You're a subhuman. And that's really, that's hard words to use, but it's really what it is. And so another law you guys remember, I don't know if you remember the 3 strikes laws in the 90s. And so I don't know if you guys remember that law, but that was a very, very damaging law to a lot of people.
I remember.
You remember, Renell. So with this one, as we recall, guys, and this one right here is a law that really said that if you get a 3rd felony, you could be put away for 25 years to life. And see, the problem with this law was that it was very, very racialized. They really focused on a lot of drug use, and there was a huge crack epidemic in the 90s. A huge crack epidemic. And I just lost my uncle last year to drug overdose. He would not hurt a fly, but he had a problem with drugs. Good guy, but he was in prison, and he ended up passing away. But the problem with that is that it really opened the door for mass incarceration of mainly Latino and African American men, because they did not look at drugs the way they do now. So today, when you look at the opioid epidemic, there's a real compassion around drug use. You know, we talk about it as a health issue. But during the time when it was a brown and black issue, you really didn't have that kind of language being used. And so what you did is you exploded the prison population to over 2 million people, most of whom are African American and Latino. And so 60% of the, African American minorities make up about 30% of the nation, but 60% of the prisons are filled with people of color. And so there's some really good books you guys should read. It's called The New Jim Crow.
I think we got disconnected with Kevin.
I think so. Oh, there he is.
Okay, there.
You see me?
Yeah, we lost you for a bit.
So I don't know if you guys get some time. There's a really good documentary called 13. It's a really good on Netflix. And there's a really good book called The New Jim Crow. And so those are really good. And it shows you that you can have people who are prejudiced, but when they have power, now you've elevated that prejudice to racism. And so you could have African Americans who are bigoted, but as far as them being racist, they don't have the power for that in this country. Okay? So you guys are more than welcome to get feedback on the slides, and if anyone has any comments.
I do, Kevin. Just really, I'm here. Kevin, I'm going to be your #1 biggest fan today, like everyone else. And I'm here. I just want to be mindful of people's time. That if you feel you need to log off, feel free. I know, but I feel we're going to continue having the conversation, and I'm okay with that as long as everyone else is okay with that.
And I deeply apologize to my representative. I really do. Yeah.
I'm learning. And I think this is a great conversation. So I'm more than happy. But Ron has his hand up, and then we'll go to the next person.
Sounds good.
Yes. So awesome presentation. So if people have to leave, see you later. Have a great weekend. Be safe and healthy. Wow. Miscegenation. I don't know how to pronounce it. I looked it up right now.
Miscegenation, huh?
But
Miscegenation.
3 strikes, that applies to me. Seriously, because again, remember, I'm driving around in East Lake, minding my own business with my family, EIB, with my family on a Sunday afternoon. I'm like, wow, during the day, can you imagine what it's like late at night when those officers want to, arrest people, right? Think you're on drugs, breaking the law, whatever. So I learned to, when I cross the border, put my hands on the steering wheel, take off my sunglasses and my cap, wait for them to say, remove your mask. My hands are on the steering wheel, my windows are down. Long story short, the reality is my attorney, David Gutierrez, okay, I went to high school with him, Olympic boxer. He says, don't say anything. Say, talk to my attorney with my hands on the steering wheel, whatever. Talk to my attorney. Don't say anything. That's power. Seriously, that's what I teach my kids and my closest friends. Talk to my attorney with my hands calmly on the steering wheel, sunglasses off, cap off, being very respectful, talking slow and clear with eye contact, because they do have these cameras now.
Yeah. I really, you know, Miss Academia and Mr. Nalpamore, they have some good stuff. I want to make sure they get a chance to share their stuff. Thanks for now. I appreciate it.
Is it good to go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll get it.
So Kevin gave that very, it's a powerful description of prejudice and race evolving into racism. But I also want to just ask us, do we agree that identity is the same as race? And what are our thoughts around what happens when identity is based on race? Like, we have to remember, race is a social construct. It's something that was created to perpetuate the worth of a group of people for the benefit of another group of people. So it's pretty much using people for your own benefit. But the foundation of that is the worth of that person based on their physical appearance, the color of their skin, their physical attributes. So what happens to us is that as a people, within our own identity, when we put race as a factor in that creation of identity. We talked about stereotypes last time. That's what happens when we use race as part of our identity. We tend to start to drink the Kool-Aid and begin to believe in those stereotypes that are placed on us. We begin to believe the stereotypes that are placed on others. And it's not a far cry to move from that belief of stereotypes to begin to be judged and then to begin to behave in a racist manner, whether it's institutionalized or individual behavior. Because I agree with Kevin, in the United States, for people of color to have that power to be racist it's a systemic thing. But as people, we can behave in a racist manner. We can behave in a racist manner. Does that mean that yes, you have the power to put other people in a place where you want them to be, especially if you are the person who holds that power. So for example, if I as a counselor believe that a certain group of my students don't warrant my attention as a counselor, then I'm not going to give them what they need. To me, I have to be very cognizant of that because that is my own prejudgment and my own racist attitude that's getting in the way of my work. You know, it's hurting a certain group of students who I feel don't deserve what I'm able to offer. To me, that's what racism is. And to me, that is as personal as it gets on a day-to-day living that I do and that I work in with my students. Alex, you can go to the next slide. So I pulled up some pictures too. You have historical evidence here of Japanese Americans, what racism did to them. You have historical evidence of Filipinos and racism against Filipinos. But these other two pictures, that's recent. So to say that racism was in the past, don't fool yourself because it continues to exist right now. It might not be as blatant as a Jim Crow law, but if you look at the imagery here of Samoan being projected as fat and lazy in a cartoon made for kids, what does that teach kids about Samoans? Right. Then let's jump to now. I love this picture here. My ethnicity is not a virus. this struck a chord with me because truly, if we dig deeper into that, what made it okay to jump to that conclusion of the Wuhan, what was that? The Wu virus. What was it? It was called before. That was associating it with China. I can't remember it.
Wuhan.
Yes.
Wuhan.
The Wuhan virus. And that that becoming the impetus for people to have hate against Asian Americans in the United States. So this is my question to you, and I would just love to have some couple of feedback. My question to you is this: is it anti-AAPI hate, or is this anti-AAPI racism? Because for me, there's a difference between hate and racism. You can hate, you don't have to enforce laws or laws above on top of that, right? To perpetuate that hate. But even in the media, why is it that what Asian Americans are going through not considered racist? We have to think about the position that we're in society and being the buffer between other different races. Again, going back to that model minority myth. Why is that there? Because it's systemic. If we took away all of those stereotypes, if we didn't fall for all of these messaging about one race being better than another, then really we'll realize that there's more to gain than being together and trying to create a system that's more equitable. But we can't let that happen. Society cannot let that happen, because when you begin to take away the differences, or take away, the differences, there's power there, because you see the shared humanity. And those who perpetuate racism will no longer have power. And so it's really important for us to look at this and say, this was in the past, but it's also now. What does that mean to me as an Asian American? How am I playing into it? And so going to the next slide, I'm going to ask you guys, think about the time when you experienced racism, and then I'm going to challenge you to think about a time when you perpetuated racism. Because we all have done that. And that second question is much more difficult to think about and to acknowledge, because that means that we've got our own self, things within us that we need to fix. If I can have a couple of quotes to share, think about a time when you experienced racism in your life. Yes, this is gonna be a courageous conversation. It's not easy. Think about a time when you experienced racism in your life, and then think about a time when you perpetuated racism.
Dina, I think Renell has his hand raised.
Go for it, Renell.
Okay, again, I don't want to dominate this, monopolize this. So briefly, two things real brief. I was trying to segue into this because I'm not going to answer this pink one, but two things. I was at Starbucks down the road from my office, Bonita Road, okay, across from the golf course, minding my own business, buying the 7 professional, day secretaries, the princesses for a day, right? Administrative princesses. Long story short, I'm minding my own business, buying like gift cards and like coffee and flowers, right? Some lady, some white Caucasian lady starts chiming in about Trump and, oh, you must be Biden, Kamala Harris or whatever. I'm like, what? Who are you? Do you know me? I'm saying to myself, right? And she's like 6 feet away, next in line, right? And I'm like, I put the stop sign to her because it's not going to raise my blood pressure before I even start work. I'm like, wait a minute, the election's over. And, I'm saying to myself, I'm voting for Kamala Harris. So, stop. And I'm going to mind my own business now. The second thing, I hear on the radio, and I think that's the thing. Kids don't listen to the radio. There's a lot of positive messages from the DJs, you know, when I'm driving to work and all that. So long story short, I started hearing about in 4 years, our next president could be this power lifter guy wearing whatever, a fanny pack and all that, driving a big truck. I'm like, who's that? And it's The Rock, right? The Rock. And I'm like, wow, my sister used to say, oh, you look like The Rock. The Rock looks like you. I'm like, what? So long story short, he could be our next president. I'm like, okay, let's have an open mind. It's 4 years to go. And then it drives up everybody's overheated political stuff during election time. It just is nutty, right? Elevates our emotions unnecessarily, seriously. So that's why they say, don't talk about politics, you know, unless you're having a sit down, calm composure, you know, with reasonable people. Like if they're overheated, it's the wrong time to talk to them, especially like if drinking's involved. If they're overheated, we're taught, nope, don't talk to them, waste of breath, time waster. Wait until the next day after they sleep on it when they're reasonable. And if not, change the subject. I'm not talking about that with you. It's a waste of my time. Stop sign.
Thank you, Ranello. I just kind of want to take the time to share a little bit of my own experience of racism and how I perpetuated racism. I was a freshman at UCLA, and we were giving a group of Filipino students a tour of UCLA. And this jogger comes jogging up the steps, knocks into me, and looks at me, and she says, "Go back where you came from."
Whoa.
In front of my young Filipino brothers and sisters. I was shocked. Now, let me tell you, growing up in the neighborhood where it was multicultural and there were only 5 Filipinos, that was, to me, it was like shocking. It's like, what? What do you mean go back where I came from? I'm from here. What the heck, you know? And so one of the older students, the seniors, came up to her and pretty much confronted her about, do you realize that what you just did is racist? You called out this young sister and told her to go back where she came from. You don't even know where she did come from. There's just some assumptions that you're making. Her excuse was, oh, I'm really stressed out. I'm trying to train for a marathon, and I didn't mean that. That's racism. That's not even microaggression. That's like straight up telling me you don't belong here. You need to go back where you came from. That experience hurt me so much that I perpetuated racism against white people. For a long time in my life, I could not trust anyone who was white, and everything that I had assumed about them, I had to protect myself because I thought the worst about them. And I could have missed out on some really good relationships if I had not allowed myself to just look at what that is, be stronger in my identity, and open up my relationship with other folks who weren't Filipino. My perpetuation of white people, of racism towards white, was that I excluded them from my life. I did not want to have anything to do with them because I felt that they were not worthy of my time and of my life. You know, and that's how I perpetuated racism. So go beyond that really had me thinking about, am I comfortable in my own skin? Have I accepted my being Filipino? Because if I have, then that crap shouldn't bother me. I should confront it. It should not bother me, and it should not make me exclude a whole group of people to be part of my life. That's how I perpetuated racism. That was my power, excluding white folks from my life. Because it may not be an institution, but it was Dina's that excluded white from my life. That's how I perpetuated racism. And I'm just blessed that in my own identity, I've come together in my own identity. I've become stronger and just really loving myself and my skin, that allowed me to open up and embrace other people, be part of me, be part of my circle.
Exactly.
Anyone else want to share?
Yeah, I have similar to you too, Dina, in the perpetuate part. But with racism, you know, in the past, I've been really trying to think of like, I don't think I've ever experienced anything overtly racism like you expressed, Dina, about like someone telling me to go. But like I was saying earlier, like those microaggressions. I think it also comes from, you know, I married outside my race. My husband is Latino, and where they're from, there's not very many Filipinos or Asians. And so I love them. And he'll be the first person to tell you he's a shit talker, right? But when he introduced me and Brianna to his family, it's like, oh, you're Asian, are you going to bring lumpia? Oh, do you eat dog? Like, oh, let me put the dog away. Like, and I'm like, really? Are we 12? Like, you know what I mean? So it's those kind of things when, I think when Ron mentioned it earlier, like when you're with your friends. So I experience it that way. I don't, like I said, microaggression, I don't know if I'm going to call that racism, but similarly to you, Dina, I also perpetuate racism towards white people. And I think it is something fairly recent. Ron talked about this earlier about with all the politics, people are a little bit more outspoken now. People are saying things now. You look through things through a different lens. And I've never had these conversations until my adulthood. So when I look at things are very different. I recently, I went back to school to get my admin credential, and one of the classes was about cultural awareness, those kinds of things. But when I looked around the room of 30 educators, there were only 4 people of color in the room. And the instructor herself was white. And so it was very difficult for me to sit there and listen to this white woman talk about all this stuff. And the 4 of us, I know, kind of would like look at each other, and make faces, or I probably should have spoken up, but I'm Asian, and like my daughter said, I don't like conflict. So but truth be told, in the 3rd class, it did come to a head because someone did say a comment. Someone did say a comment of, what? It's not as racist as it was before. And then I just was like, oh, hell no, this white woman, what, right? And then again, and true to me, I didn't say anything, but I wrote it in feedback. And then the next class, the professor said, and she got 4 messages, very similar. And we talked about it. And I was able to say my piece about it. And, I think having to explain yourself, like what you're saying is a microaggression to me. Like what you're saying, like not all Filipinos are good at math. Not all of my husband, the other day we were talking, I know, I can't remember which one it was, but we were talking about good stereotypes and bad stereotypes and one of the things, and he thinks he's funny, but he was like, oh, then he just started saying all these Asian stereotypes. And I'm like, you're missing my point, dude. Right? Like he was like, so, I think through this political time and all these talks through everything, right? The last year, it is changing people's views and how you feel towards other races, and whether it's good or bad. But that's why I very much appreciate this conversation today, and everyone, Dina, Jen, and Kevin, for putting this together. And I don't think, what I just said, I really can't believe I said that out loud. But and it's being recorded, so we'll see if I'll be an administrator in the next year or not.
Well, Valerie, and I'm glad you said that, because it is time to talk about race. So we have to, and racism, in a forthright, honest manner, because this is the cancer in society. We keep hiding it thinking that
Yes.
it's not there, but it is. And so, sister, if there's something that comes at you because you said your truth, then the people who are going to have some disagreements about it need to look in the mirror and figure out, why did that impact me so much? Because this is healthy conversation. This is conversation that doesn't perpetuate hate. It's taking the scab off of what is wrong and trying to heal the wound that's there. It needs to be exposed and needs to be talked about. I'm going to go with Claire. Claire, go ahead, please.
Oh, hi. So I echo what Valerie said, right? Like, I haven't experienced anything overtly racist that I was going to confront or anything, but as far as perpetuating racism, I think it's, kind of what a statement I had made last time about, I've used the stereotypes in my advantage. And I do think that that's perpetuating the racism by allowing those things to, just, well, yeah, okay, there's this positive thing. I'm going to roll with it and just go with it. And so, kind of jumping ship a little bit, like, I've always been an outspoken person in my family, but I do that in my family and not so much at work. And then, like, when I do kind of like finally go, I'm going to, raise my hand, I'm going to say something, I'm going to challenge authority, I feel so like I have to be super prepared to go in to talk to that person of authority. And it's very overwhelming because of that institutional, like, oppression that puts on like Asian women to be a certain submissive, quiet, follow the rules and like don't look at people in the eye kind of thing. And so I kind of address more with the perpetuating the racism, because I'm allowing it to, determine what things I'm willing to share my input about. And I know I have good ideas, and I know that I have something positive to share, and yet I'm allowing this system, like this, institutionalized stuff, just really, bring me down. And so, like, the confidence that I have in my classroom and teaching my subject matter, I really try to, bring that same energy when I'm in a room full of other educators and administrators, because, like, I know like what I'm doing is right. And I wouldn't just throw out an idea just because I want to throw a stick out there. It's not like I'm trying to be a thorn, but sometimes I do feel like, man, are people looking at me because of, are they looking at me because of what I look like? And are they hearing my suggestion with the same validity as somebody who doesn't look like me?
Yes, Claire, thank you.
Right on, Claire. And I want to put a label to that, and I don't know if that label still exists, but it's internalizing racism, where we tend to believe what's been imposed on us about our worth and our place in society. Thank you so much for being courageous, Claire, and sharing that. Dan.
We're getting raw. Okay. This is good, you guys. Thank you. Thinking about a time when I perpetuated racism within the Filipino culture, within my own family. And it had a lot to do with how I saw, from my experience with my interactions of being mistreated by my own mother, and then being perpetrated by a Filipino man, and how that creates my own internal conflict and issues, internal racism within my own culture, but having to go through, because I deserved it when I finally admitted it and owned it, to heal and to be able to remove those blockages that prevented me from seeing my own culture, my own people, my own family, and even my Filipino friends. And honestly, straight up, it was hard for me to have Filipino women as friends. I didn't trust Filipino women as friends. It was hard for me. because I didn't know if I fit into the group. I didn't know if I was Filipina enough. I didn't know if I fit into their expectations or their standards of what a Pinay means. And then let alone with being perpetrated by a Filipino man and healing through that own process and rejecting that piece. Whereas my first marriage was with a Hispanic. But as you know, obviously I went through my process of healing and been happily married now for 20 years to a Filipino man. But perpetuating that racism was a big part of what I participated in, what I participated in, and caused even my own oldest daughter to have perspectives or a perception of racism towards men or to, you know, within our own culture, because I wasn't healed yet. I'm still healing. We're all healing. We're all growing, but participating through that. So I'm just putting that out there, how we get that internalized perspective.
Thank you, sister. That's raw, girl. It
I'm
really
being raw.
is.
I'm playing. You don't have time to play.
That's raw. That's real.
No, and you're absolutely right. There is no time to play, and there's no time to be nice about this topic, because it's killing, it's hurting us, and it's been killing a group of folks from history and over. And I have to say, you know, if we're not real with it, and we're not real with how we play a part in that, then we're part of the problem. You know, so thank you for sharing that.
Dina, you know, real fast, you know, just looking at what Valerie shared about, Valerie, I think you said you didn't learn about your culture until you went to college. Is that what you just said? You shared earlier?
I did. Besides the oral history at home, but formally.
Right, right. And I know, Dina, what you were talking about is not really having a strong Filipino identity until you were much older.
Right.
And see, that's where the structural racism, that's the damage of structural racism, is that, you know, when you don't, because all of us get a lot of European history in school, and we don't get that. We need to do that studying outside of school. You know, because we're not getting that. We're not being validated culturally in the schools. Like, the only thing I really learned about we as African-American kids, we hated history in school because it was so embarrassing, because all they talked about was slavery. You know, they always talked about slavery and poverty, but they never talked about the greatness of African people prior to slavery. You see what I'm saying? And so that's the structural racism. And so it's not just what they're giving you, it's what they leave out. You know, because all of us are dealing with that. As we're getting older, now we're starting to become really starting to see the light culturally about who we are as people, because we've taken the initiative to learn on our own. But when you don't share, we don't validate these kids culturally, then you can internalize that. And then my last point was just that it's interesting how when we do aspire to all these different beauty standards and intelligence, it's always a European standard. You know, it's always that.
Yeah. Hey, Kevin, that's great. Last week, Miss Ware, I don't even know who she is, but I remember Miss Ware, she was pointing out the same thing that you're saying. You know, all this textbook curriculum history, it's horrible. You know, who writes this stuff? You know, they talked about, you know, like slavery stuff. Hey, you know, they don't want their kids to talk about negative stuff like that. We don't even know if it's true. You know, you can't believe everything you read in here, right?
I'm gonna disagree with you about that, Ronello, because I think we need to know the good, the bad, and the ugly with history.
Exactly.
The opposite happens to Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders. We're not in history at all. So what is the messaging that goes out to people out there that we don't matter? And when we don't matter, we don't have a voice. We don't belong. We're ever going to be visitors in this country, not citizens. And so I am so glad you brought that up, Kevin, because that's insidious racism that's in textbooks and in education that perpetuates this kind of relationship with each other.
Right. And it's self-hatred.
Yes.
because many of our kids are embarrassed to be who they are.
Yes.
And I don't want to take up too much of your time, but thanks, Tina, for that. This
And
is great stuff.
we have 2 hands raised. I'm gonna go Kenya first, then Claire.
Hi. I have 3 points, but it's not related to this slide. Is that okay to share, or I don't need to share at all?
Yes.
We'll go for it, Kenya.
Okay. I did want to speak to microaggressions. So microaggressions is actually a form of racism. It just makes people feel more comfortable to call it microaggression because it's more palatable. So I just want to make sure that that's a clear understanding that it's all racist or discriminatory acts that do occur. And I might be the first one to say, can you call people on everything every single time? Probably not, but there are many opportunities to engage in conversation to enlighten folks. So I did want to kind of clear that up. And then I wanted to share about the 3 strikes law. Although it was in the 90s, the law was couched to make it appear that it was only about drugs. But it affected black men, brown men, and women of color, because if you had a lot of parking tickets and had a warrant, that could turn into a felon. So that's why the deleterious effects were so significant, because it wasn't even about violent crime. And that kind of perpetuation still exists today. Because I worked in special education, and I believe special education is a prison to pipeline, because it handicaps African American learners from ever getting out of special education. So they won't have a rigorous curriculum. Now they have self-hatred. They feel disempowered. This leads to anger. Now they're labeled, and it goes on and on and on. And this really exists, right? So it's in my most recent experience, the racism exists in our policies and procedures, but no one would challenge that until they have an act of discrimination or racism against them. And even our very own colleagues will see it happening, will watch it existing, may participate, because complicit compliance is the same as complicity. Saying nothing is the same as complicity when those overt acts happen to a colleague. And so we have to really learn about the policies and procedures that we have in our school districts so that we can empower our students, teachers, colleagues, and ourselves. Because this racism is hard to, unless someone's calling you a obscene hatred word, it's still, our current administration may not do something about it. So I think we have to decide how we empower. And then my last point is about slavery. So if any of you are interested, the Legacy Museum is in Alabama, and it's all about how slavery links to prison, which links to mass, what do you call it? I can't think of the word, I'm sorry. But slavery is important. Pardon?
Yeah, did you mean mass incarceration or?
But there's another word. So there's this gentleman who's, I don't know if you saw the movie Just Mercy, but he had linked how slavery is linked to a lot of the capitalistic institutionalized racism that exists today, 2021. And so he's done all these lineages. Actually, he linked slavery and lynching to what's happening today. And we do modern day lynching, so, but we do it through handicapping people through their, through discrimination at work. Like Valerie said earlier, I want to speak up, but sometimes I don't. Well, if I speak up, now I'm jeopardizing the food on my table for my family. Yeah, so that's a type of lynching, a corporate lynching that we do for people of color, or even white folks who may fight, who may be on our side as well. So abolitionists did exist. So there are many groups that are fighting for all of us. And I just think that it became popular because people were quarantined and were glued to TV. If there was never a quarantine, I'm not quite so sure this movement would be the way that it is. Because I've been experiencing it, since I was 5 years old. So that's
Well, that's
pretty much
great
it.
insight. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Tina.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kenya. Thank you for being part of this conversation. I think it's enriching to be able to share each other's histories and each other's experiences. Ronello, is that what Valerie said, a leftover hand raise?
I've been waiting
I'm gonna
patiently,
trademark that.
on the Disneyland ride, Fast Pass. I've been patient.
All right,
Well,
dude, go for it, and then we're gonna go.
I'll be brief. I'll be brief. Okay, because I know it's already late. Friday, we're always worn out. I'll be brief. Let me just summarize what I heard. Not everything, but recently what I heard. Dina, I hear you 100%. Internalize. We start questioning our judgment when there's such a disguised racist, and they could be a person of color in your office, and you start questioning your judgment when you're worn out and fatigued from giving your heart and soul to our job as a counselor, helping all these families, kids and families that are in crises, SEL, right? Mental health, right? Long story short, I'm starting to question my judgment when somebody says, hey, there's a teacher or two or three complaining. Well, stop sign, quit blowing up my text message. I'm removing myself from this 3-person counselor thread. And you know what? Email me. Stop blowing up my messages in the middle of the night. Long story short, we have to pick our battles. We have to know when we're internalizing it, questioning our judgment. Long story short, I pick my battles, like we all do. Like Miss Bratton said, I can't be having a conversation when I'm going to be somewhere. I have to have my mind right. And then, like Jen says, wow, that's real stuff. It's real hurtful stuff. We have to be strong. We are strong. We are strong, vocal people. Together, especially, but individually we are. But we have to be smart, cerebral, IQ. We pick our battles.
Thank you, Ronello. Sister Jen, go for it.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you mind moving to the next slide, please?
Sorry, D, you got cut off. Okay, unconscious bias. Okay, here we go. Okay, before I go on to unconscious bias, I just want to recap the definition of racism that Kevin reviewed, racism and prejudice. So again, racism is a system of advantage. And I want to throw in the word privilege, a system of advantage / privilege to this, because it's based on race, where each race is assigned a value. And I know last night or just this morning, I was texting Dina and Kevin, and how I was reviewing the slides and immersing myself into the actual words of the slides, and that those words, each race is assigned a value, just having to sit with those few words. And then with prejudice is referring to beliefs, thoughts, feelings, and attitudes someone holds about a group. It's a prejudgment originated or rooted in actual experiences. Now, as we enter unconscious bias, I want to point out that it is a mental process where negative generalizations and attitudes are formed towards people or groups of people based on what they look like, how they speak, and where they come from. I also want to add, it is in fact unconscious bias. It is in fact a prejudice. It is a prejudice, or unsupported judgments or prejudgments in favor of or against a thing, a person, or a group, and comparing it to another group or person in a way that's usually considered unfair or unjust. So as I was even reflecting on the title of this workshop, The Roots of Race, I was reflecting on that there's a pyramid of hate. It's called the Pyramid of Hate. And the foundation of that pyramid, if you can just visualize the pyramid, the bottom or the foundation of that pyramid of hate, it is bias attitude. It's our biases. So it's the prejudgment. It's the foundation of that pyramid. And
yes.
And this happens when we accept the prejudgments, when we accept the preconceived views and not challenging those hateful statements and the jokes that go out about those prejudgments. And then at that next level above that pyramid is acts of bias. Those acts, we all know that we can't act on anything unless it's already a thought, unless it's in our minds. We know thoughts create ideas. So this level incorporates the definition that Kevin talked about with of prejudice. You've heard of the saying, where the head or the mind goes, the body follows. Well, examples of that is when someone makes hateful jokes, when they make those hateful statements, and then we even start avoiding certain groups and ridicule them. And then the next level of this pit of hate is biased, motivated by hate. This is where the systems of those privileged and institutions of power are established. Again, this is the definition of racism. It's intentional discrimination. It's manifesting in an exclusion. This is where there's preventing access to employment, housing, education. And let's even break this down a little further for our own students, where our students are excluded from even entering certain classes or certain clubs or certain activities or certain groups.
Yes.
This level moves into bias motivated by violence. The violence, and this is why we're all here today, is the bias motivated by violence. These are acts of threat. This is the desecration of property. This is even where, unfortunately, where we grieve our losses because of those violent acts. And then the final top of the pyramid is genocide. Obviously, is the killing of a large number of people from a nation or group. And thanks for giving me the time to just go through this pyramid, and I'm just scratching the surface, but I thought it was important to share this pyramid of hate because, as you know, the foundation, again, it has to do with those biases. So you can see how critical it is to address our own unconscious bias, because when they're not addressed, they are unconsciously fed over time by our external experiences. When they are not addressed, our biases can eventually graduate or progress to those next levels within that pyramid. So to keep us to further moving up to that pyramid of hate, we have to address those unconscious bias. So Valerie, could you do the next slide, please?
That's great, Jen. Thank you.
You're welcome. We're all in this together. So in the chat, this is a 3-2-1 activity. Take 3 seconds to recall a time in which you prejudged a student or a person of color, and if you experienced being judged. And I know we all could relate to this. And just to point out, we all carry biases, unconscious and explicit. So if you can type in a chat of your experience, or if you want to share by raising your hand, please share.
Well, I mean, going back to what I was saying earlier about having prejudice, perpetuating prejudice towards white people, I think I am overly cautious, like now. Like, for example, we went for breakfast in Coronado. We were just doing girls' brunch, right? And then we're surrounded by white people, and all I thought was someone is going to talk to me about Trump. Someone's going to say something anti-Asian to me and my friends. Someone, you know, and so and no one cared because everyone was eating their avocado toast. But like, you know, like no one was paying attention to me. But me going into this fancy hotel, having this fancy brunch, I just was thinking someone is going to, and being on Coronado Island, I just thought someone was going to say something to us. And that was me judging the white people at this restaurant.
Thanks for sharing.
I hear you.
Anybody else? Ron, I see your hand up.
Okay, I have one, but it's from 3 slides before. I forgot to mention Claire. I hear everything you say, Claire. Mine is something different. I play on a Mexico basketball team, okay? These are business owners, half of them wealthy, and the other half are laborers. So there's issues. We all have issues, right? We stop drinking. Doctor says, stop drinking, you're going to die. Your kidneys, your liver, you're going to die within 5-10 years. We take it serious. We want to live another 20 years and have quality life. But I have to pick my battles. These are big guys, and they have their own machismo, whatever you want to call it. And I'm like having conversations, and I get outnumbered. And in a way, exclusion is like bullying. It's a form of bullying. Exclusion, seriously, we all know that. But I'm having these conversations with these big guys that are violent on the basketball court. They get mad, and they say, hey, don't have those conversations, Ron. Number one, you're wasting your breath. They're angry. Reheat it. Wait until they sleep on it, and then maybe have a conversation. Not on the court. Too competitive. Everybody wants to win. Machismo. All of these things. For example, one of the business owners, he's a business owner. They forget they're on the U.S. side, and there's rules and norms. You know, long story short, it starts talking in nonsense, and I put the stop sign because his son is listening to it, and he's my student. All these guys come through Bonita, 4, 5, 6 kids, and go to the high school. I put the stop sign because they're saying a bunch of nonsense about weapons and just silly stuff. And the guy's being real serious, and the kids are not going to say anything. They're afraid of this person. They're afraid to say anything. So I put the stop sign and I correct it. And then he gets it. And then the kids, they look at me like, okay, I hear you. But you know, I have to pick my battles because I can't be doing that every single time. It's exhausting. It's work.
Thanks for sharing. So for the sake of time, Valerie, could we go to the next slide, please? This is just a 3-second activity. So if you can put in the chat, what does this say? Can someone type in the chat, or can you all type in the chat? What does this say on this screen, on this slide?
I see it, but somebody else, please. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Elizabeth put neuroscience for kids.
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
Same as Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Okay. Valerie, could you share the next slide, please? What does this say? So this was, now that you received the answer from the last slide, how are you feeling? Post your responses or please share.
It's like an eye doctor test. If you have 20/20 vision or need eyeglasses, aging.
It's almost like, you know, you have to look at the whole picture. You've got to know the whole story. You know, you make a judgment based on not even half of what you see, and it was wrong.
Yes. And again, and no prejudgment here in this group, because again, we're learning together. But I felt it was important for us to just experience this quick activity because again, we all carry the bias. We all carry those prejudgments. But again, just what your response was, Elizabeth, was beautiful because we're all growing together. We're in this, I feel this, our time together is like a community of care. It's a community of care. We're caring for each other. Okay, so moving on real quick to the next slide. We'll go through this pretty quick. So this, the pause, this is the power of the pause. The pause comes from a lifelong social advocate, author Howard J. Ross, who wrote Everyday Bias. And these are some basic strategies that we can support during our growth in this community of care. So number one is paying attention to what's happening beneath the words, like paying attention to the tone and the body language, and discerning what they're really saying underneath the words that are spoken. A in the word pause means acknowledging and being aware of your reactions. Notice if we feel like we're starting to defend or justify or judge or interpret what may be going on, and we're asking that we exercise responding versus reacting to a situation, because reactions are often tied to two words, you guys. Reactions are often tied to two words: chemicals and emotions. Okay, so when you get a physiological chemicals and our emotions together, what do you get? A reaction, right? So responding enables us to react favorably, and can happen simply by literally pausing and taking 2 deep breaths. So responding makes more of a conscious effort than reacting. So I want to point out also that over the last 3 decades, there has been a lot of neuroscience research on explicit and implicit bias. So for the you, understanding that there are possible explanations and interpretations of what is being said to us or how we're treated. Everybody has a story, but we need to also ask ourselves, do we even understand our own story? Okay, so as is search for the constructive and empowering or productive way to deal with the situation. And this may have to include gathering data about your own biases. So there is actually, you guys, a free implicit bias assessment tool. It's called the implicit association test. So as we're part of this community of care and growing in this, I want to encourage all of you to take it, to stay open, and to seek out your other individuals who are in this journey with you. And then finally, with E, execute is to execute that plan that is mutually agreed upon. And basically, straight up, you guys, if you mess up, clean it up by owning up and what you may have torn up. Okay, so own it. So I'm just gonna put it out there like that.
Love it.
And the final thing I want to just add is, in this journey that we're in right now, we must encounter a time in our lives where we have, if we haven't done so already, to enter an investigative period in our lives. What I mean by that is, we can't neglect to communicate the importance of knowing our history. Okay, there will always be an element of deficit when we have these conversations if we don't investigate our own histories. Believe it or not, our whole entire discussion has been a discussion about our history. We need to know that our parents, our grandparents, our ancestors, we need to know what they protested against, what they traumatically endured, what they fought for, what they died for. And we need to empathize all of the thousands of steps that they took as they marched, as they marched, as they marched, as they marched, as they marched for us. So I'm going to leave it right there. And I'll have Sister Dina to close our time together. This slide on the heart, it does pretty much reinforce what I talked about, the pause. But the last point I want to talk about is the T. Thank them. Thank the people who fought for us. Okay, thank the people who are willing to have these challenging conversations. If you're blessed enough to have your parents, your grandparents, your great-great-parents alive still, thank them. Listen to their stories. Record their stories. Scribe their stories and take action and follow up. And my hope is that we all consider or took away something from our time together where we can take action or explore some action steps to our next community time together. So I'll leave it right there, Dee. It's yours.
Thanks, sis. Doc, can you put the very last slide, please? So I just wanted to end this with a quote from Ibram X. Kendi. The opposite of racist isn't not racist. The opposite of racist is being anti-racist. To say that you're not racist is just not enough. It's actually just, it does perpetuate racism, because by saying I'm not racist absolves you in your mind of your responsibility, of our personal responsibility of addressing racism. So to be anti-racist is to undo racism. That means identify it, describe it, dismantle it. We all each have a power, our powers to do this. It doesn't have to be a huge movement in a big group, but every single thing that we do when we identify, describe it, and dismantle it goes towards the work of eradicating racism. But you have to believe that you have to be anti-racist, not just not racist. So yes. To say that I'm not racist because I don't see color, you're diminishing my worth, because my color is worth something to me. I need you to be anti-racist and to work with me and to work with us in dismantling this system of racism. And again, it's a social construct. It's not, it's something, if people can create it, then we can dismantle it. And I just want to thank all of you for sticking with us for an hour and a half. We know it's been a long evening, but we hope that it's been worthwhile, the evening, this conversation. And really just want to thank you for being with us. I don't know if Jen and Cam want to add anything else, but from the bottom of my heart, sincere thanks to all of you.
No. If Kevin and Jen don't want to say anything, I want to make sure on the behalf of the committee that I say thank you. This was a very powerful conversation, and I appreciate all the work and that you put into it and getting us gathered here today to have this wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was a great time. It was a great time.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. I told you it's going to be difficult to beat, right, Kevin, Dina, Jen? I told you. Have a great night.